everyone. My name is Karen Boyd. I am Berkeley Law class of 1996. I'm on the alumni board and chair of the Silicon Valley REACH chapter, which is Regional Engagement Alumni Chapter. This chapter is designed to connect Berkeley alums to each other and to the school. And we have events around substantive law, around sort of networking and social events, and then an event like this, which is about sort of career path and career development. We have a great group of people who signed up for the event today. I took a quick look at the list. We have almost 100 attendees signed up. Looks like we have a range of alumni from class of 1972 to class of 2020. About half and half corporate counsel and law firm lawyers, with a handful of government and academics thrown into the mix. So thank you for taking the time to join us today. We're looking forward to a really good conversation, both among the panelists and with everybody who is attending. On that front, if you have a question that you'd like to send in writing, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We're going to be trying to answer those questions and integrate those into the conversation as we go. And if you'd like to actually, share your question verbally with us, you can raise your hand. I am informed that nobody ever does this on Zoom webinars that Berkeley Law hosts. And so I've taken it as a personal challenge to encourage somebody to raise, or more than one person to raise your hand, and we will then unmute you, and you will be, you'll be able to share your input or your question live with us. Let's see if I have any other housekeeping. Oh, I'd like to just encourage everybody to close the other windows on your screen. I've actually turned off my other monitor so that we can really focus on being together and focus on this event. We have some a wonderful moderator and panelists who are sharing their experiences with us, and I want to encourage everybody to really focus on that to the extent that you possibly can. So another quick housekeeping, in the chat box that you will see, you've gotten a link to other events and sort of the event calendar. So you want to check that out and see if there's other things that you're interested in. And with that, I would like to introduce the moderator of our general counsel panel. Brad Lewis is class of 1987. He is the chief legal officer of the software company Informatica. He's been there since 2017. Before that, he was the GC of the investment management company BlackRock. And before that, he was an AUSA and a law firm litigator with both with Mugger, Tolles & Olson and with Fenwick & West. And with that, I will turn it over to Brad. I'm going to be helping him monitor questions and stuff, but other than that, I'm going to be going off screen. Thanks, Brad.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Thanks very much. So we've got a great panel today of Berkeley Law grads that are chief legal officers of some of the most leading innovative companies in the Bay Area. They've all taken slightly different paths to becoming CLOs, some of which you'll hear about today. Just to emphasize what Karen said, these events are always better when they're a little more interactive, so don't hesitate to submit a question or raise your hand. I will be monitoring for that during the panel discussion, and we'll ask those live. So I'd like to do some quick introductions for our panelists, starting with Rashmi Garde. Rashmi joined Sophos in this last January 2020, as chief legal officer. She's been an accomplished general counsel or chief legal officer with 20 years experience in a number of companies. Prior to Sophos, she was at Centrify Corporation. Prior to that, she was general counsel at Bloomreach, a privately held SaaS company, and Marin Software, which was a publicly traded company, software company. And earlier in her career, she was vice president, general counsel, and corporate secretary at VMware, where she led the global legal organization as VMware grew from a 20 million startup to a $2 billion enterprise by the time she left in 2009. Rashmi began her career as a software engineer at Apple and also at Rome Systems, and so that's obviously very helpful in her work for technology companies. Our next panelist is David Estrada. David is the Chief Legal Officer at Nuro. David has spent his career helping very innovative technology companies and Fortune 500 companies, especially those that are navigating unique, often novel regulatory challenges while they're launching very innovative products. So before Nuro, he held executive positions at Bird, Kitty Hawk, and Lyft during their formative and growth stages. And prior to that, he began his journey in transportation policy as the legal director for Google X, where he pioneered some of the first state laws and regulations governing autonomous vehicles. And finally, our third panelist is Irene Liu. Irene is the Chief Legal Officer at Hopin, an online virtual events platform where you can create virtual events to connect people around the globe. Prior to going in-house, Irene worked at the U.S. Department of Justice, the Antitrust Division, and the Federal Trade Commission in the Bureau of Consumer Protection. She gained extensive international privacy policy and compliance experience at BlackBerry, overseeing their global law enforcement compliance team, and at Lookout, an enterprise mobile security company. And prior to Hopin, Irene was the general counsel of Checker, where she oversaw legal compliance policy and the customer education teams. So with that introduction, I'd like to start with a question actually for all of the panelists. And maybe we could start with Rashmi. And Rashmi, if you could tell us a little bit about your career path and how you wound up becoming a general counsel or CLO, and maybe throw in, if you have any advice for someone who's aspiring to that type of a role, what they should be thinking about.
Sure. Yeah, as you mentioned, this is like my second career. So I started off, I studied computer science as an undergrad and was working in software development, which is quite interesting, but I don't think it was really my passion. So when I thought about what I was going to be doing next, I actually did consider business school as well as law school. So I think I always had sort of an interest in being sort of in business law on the corporate side of things. And having been at a company before going back to law school, I think I kind of pictured working at a company on the legal side of the house instead of on the engineering side. I did focus a little bit on intellectual property and technology law. I think Berkeley's grown their programs in those areas a lot since I was there, which I think is fantastic. So I focused on that a little bit, but when I was looking at, what do I do when I graduate, I think the common path was to work at a law firm for a while. So I looked at law firms kind of in the Silicon Valley that had working with computer technology clients, and started out at a law firm but I didn't stay in law firms for very long. I spent about 3 years doing that. And then it's kind of a corporate practice area, some licensing as well, technology licensing. And then it took my first in-house job was at a sort of a medium-sized company. They probably had about 500 million in revenue. And company's called EFI, and I wasn't the only attorney. There were, it was probably a group of about 6 or 8 of us over time that were there. And it was kind of a comfortable step, to jump out of being a law firm and to have other attorneys with me and not being the only one to answer all the questions. For me, the path to GC has been to be the first attorney at a company. And I don't know if that's a common path or not, because I know a lot of people kind of go in-house into larger companies, right? And then you start out in a practice area and kind of grow that way. So for me, it's the first attorney and then just handling everything. So, I joined VMware when there's 120 people. And so I was just handling, and it's about after practicing law for about 5 years. And it was, what was good about that is it allowed me to grow with the company, right? So the problems of a 120 person company, yeah, you got employment issues, you're starting to do some international work, establishing subsidiaries, kind of dealing with stock plans, but as the company grows and setting up its channel sales programs, you kind of grow with it. So I had the benefit of doing that and then starting to hire teams. And then I did, as I gladly hired people and was able to, that being able to collaborate was so helpful to me, and I've always appreciated that. And then after I left VMware, we had a management change, so that was time for me to kind of move on from there. Interestingly enough, my best fit was to kind of be that first lawyer. So I did that again at Marin Software, at Bloomreach. Some of them had contracts, people who are negotiating contracts. There's a lot of commercial contracts for people who are in-house. You probably have heard that before. And then again, at Centrify, the company had been around for a number of years, but had never had in-house legal. So sort of establishing the in-house legal function. That's kind of how I came to do this a few times. For me, this newest job is one where there's already a department in place. My first time coming into a department, and in you look at a lot of the same things, but you have, a lot of areas that are already established and a team to be talking with. And so that's kind of been the one thing different that I did this time. What would I give advice for people aspiring to be a GC is, you kind of have to, it's a combination of looking for the opportunity. For me, it's having a broad skill set. But I don't think that, trying to understand all sorts of different areas of law, I'm not an expert in anything really. How to, prioritize what we should spend time on, those sorts of things. But I wouldn't say it's the only path. And I'm sure you'll hear that from my co-panelists here, maybe having expertise and then coming up in a larger organization is definitely another path.
Thanks, Rashmi. Irene, same question. Sort of how did you get to where you are, and do you have any advice on people who are interested in that career path?
Sure. So I came up from an atypical, somewhat different of a path as most people, because I started out my career after law school in government. And even before law school, I was in banking. And so I had some business background. And so I always knew that I wanted to merge business and law together in my career in the future. So my choice after Berkeley Law School was to go to the US Department of Justice in the antitrust division, because I felt that that was a perfect combination of business and law. And so I started out my career at the DOJ, then went to the FTC. And at that point, I also wanted to get a flavor of in-house. And so I went to work at BlackBerry back when BlackBerry was a thing. I get that it's no longer as much of a thing, but hopefully this audience recalls what BlackBerry was like. And at the time that I went, it was a very global company that had a lot of presence. And so I was able to get a lot of international exposure, which was really fun. But for many people that work in large legal departments, what you soon realize is that you end up honing your skills in that one area, but you may not necessarily get the generalist skills that you may want. And for someone that loves learning like myself, I wanted more. And I knew that it was more difficult to move around departments in a legal team as large as BlackBerry's. And so my next move then was to move to a smaller company. I moved to a startup called Lookout, which is a mobile security startup. And there I was the #2 attorney, which essentially meant that I was pretty much running the shop. Everyone was reporting into me, and I was doing most of the work that was day to day. And that's where I really learned the skill set of becoming a general counsel. And after being that #2 attorney for about 3 years, I realized that I pretty much could do the job. And so might as well try to get paid for it. And so I then went to Checker, which is a background check company. And I never thought that I'd be a background check company lawyer or general counsel for that matter, but my background in privacy and security, as well as the Federal Trade Commission experience was incredibly pivotal for that company. We were a highly regulated company that was regulated both by the FTC and the CFPB. So my knowledge of both having the government and the litigation background, plus all of my corporate and commercial experience, was incredibly valuable to the company. So I grew that team. There were 2 lawyers there before me, but they were very junior. So similar to Rashmi, I basically built out that team from scratch, from ground up, and built it to a team as large as 15 at one point. And it's still growing. So that was a really exciting opportunity for me to build that and see the company grow from 60 to 600. And after being there for 4 years, I had this amazing opportunity to join Hopin, which is a company that's, for those of you that don't know, this is a company that started less than 18 months ago. It's a virtual events platform that really kicked into gear during COVID. And so last year, in the beginning of January in 2019, we had 11 people. We have over 400 people right now, and we're continuing to grow very rapidly. And so by the time I came in, I was the first lawyer in as well. And I just started less than 3 months ago. December 7th was when I started. And by then there were about 300 people, and we were in 40 plus countries. And so that journey has been really fun. And so I think that's one of my GC stories, is similar to Rashmi, where you just go in and deep dive and build from ground up. And this is what I'm doing now again.
Great. Hey, before I go to David with the same question, one question that popped up in the Q&A was, and I'll pose this to either Rashmi or Irene, whoever, or David, but as somebody who's coming in and building a team from scratch, you're often hiring older, more experienced lawyers than yourself, or older, more experienced outside counsel. How did that work out? Any particular challenges with that, or the whole sort of complex subject of managing other lawyers that you'd like to talk about?
My learning my management skills was sort of on the job training. So yeah, I mean, you do have to get comfortable with, you are bringing people in with expertise. Even now, I'm bringing in people who have expertise in areas that I don't, but I'm leading them. So I think when earlier on in my career, I worked on that more, because I wanted to make sure people, my internal clients, felt I was competent to handle the role and the like, and I've become more comfortable with it over time. I would say it's, generally when I am still going to external counsel now, we go to external counsel a lot of times, and so they have a perspective that I just don't have, from like what are other companies doing, what's the practice there, and they're doing that expertise that we need. But even for the internal team, same thing. You're really looking to say, I want somebody who's really good at this. They're going to focus on this area, and it's just going to make us better. I'll learn from them. They'll learn from me. Go ahead, Irene.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the same. In my mind, I do think that for hiring a team, I'm looking for depth of experience, practicality, and flexibility. And the flexibility, especially for a startup, is incredibly important. And so that means to not judge people based on years of experience as well, too, because I do think that some people may have done something for 20 years, but they may have had just this narrow subset of skills that they could learn by coming into a new environment. And so, I typically, even when I'm hiring, I'm not judging necessarily based on years of experience. I have general counsels that are applying for roles on my team that are probably more junior than what their current title holds, but I'm looking at for the years of experience. And yes, some of them might be more tenured than I am, but at the end of the day, I still have, I've built a confidence in my skill set and also rapport with the business. And that's my role is, as a general counsel, is to be that partner and to build that confidence and rapport with the business leaders. And so once I have established that, I think it's, that's the pivotal part of being a general counsel, is being that business partner. So even if there are people that are coming in with more years of experience, like they may not necessarily have that rapport, and that's the role for us to be able to help bridge that and build that. And so I think that might be sort of a key that might be missing from that question.
Great. Yeah, great point. David, can you tell us a little bit about your career path, which is very interesting, and any advice you might have?
Yeah, let me start out with the hiring question, and then I'll work my way backwards to me, because I think what people who tune in really want to know is, one, on the outside, how do they work with in-house counsel? What gets them hired when they're on the outside? And if they want to become in-house counsel, what makes them a really good candidate for being in-house counsel? So in my experience, what people want in companies, and I've worked at a bunch of them, and some of the big ones are Google, YouTube, Yahoo, currently Nuro, not so big at this point, and Lyft, which got big while I was there. What people are looking for is problem solvers. And what they want out of lawyers is people who will come in and show empathy. And this is a really interesting point, because they don't teach you. I don't think when I was in law school, I ever heard the word empathy. I think I read a lot of cases, and it taught me how to think like a lawyer, but it didn't teach me, honestly, I don't think it taught me anything about clients and what they're actually looking for. And what they're looking for is they're looking for you to solve problems for them. I also think that generally speaking, early in your career, and then when you're in outside practice, there's a focus very much on figuring out the black letter law. Is this legal or is it not legal? And let me write a memo, and let me send it to the client, and it's going to be a very, very well written analysis of whether something is legal or not legal. When I got to in-house, my first in-house job was at Yahoo, and I took from it my experience as a litigator. I had first gone to work as a litigator at Cooley Godward, and then went with some of those partners to form a small firm called Day Casebeer, and had a very litigator mindset that was very focused on the law. When I got to Yahoo, some of the early meetings and interactions I had showed me, wait a second, they don't just want to know what's the law, they want to know how far can I push it, and what's the penalty if I don't comply. That question about the penalty became really interesting, because at the end of the day, what these companies wanted to know is, how can I put my product on the market? Not if I can put my product on the market, how can I put it on the market? If I do it like I'm currently planning, what are going to be the penalties? How are they going to then work with the lawyer to put some mitigations in place, make some changes around the edges to figure out, yes, I can put this product out. I might have to change it a little bit, and I really want to understand what the risks are associated with doing so. And so when companies look to hire people, they looked at very, very creative attorneys who can help solve problems and want to solve problems. Happy to talk more about that. Now, my career evolved from being a legal counsel to going much more into the policy world. And what I looked for was, at the companies I was at, what I got much, much more interested in was, how can I add more value at the company? And I really enjoyed being able to find those parts of the business that really push the edge of technology and law. At YouTube, when I got there, copyright was a giant question. And then when I was at Google, they needed a lawyer to come lead Google X, where self-driving cars were a brand new thing. And they needed people to figure out what's the legal landscape. And it went from analyzing the current regulations to, how do we make regulations? Because at the end of the day, new technologies are going to keep coming along. The legal frameworks that we have aren't going to anticipate all of them, and we need to make new law. So I really enjoy that aspect of the work.
Great. Let's stay with that topic that you raised for a minute, and let me pose this next question back to Rashmi. So David touched on some of the key differences between being a successful in-house lawyer as compared to a successful external lawyer. And you've spent most of your career in-house, but you've spent some time as an outside lawyer. How do you see that play out? How have you seen it play out in your career? What is it important for people who aspire to be an in-house lawyer? What's important for them to understand about how to be successful in that role?
Yeah, you are going to so when you're establishing a department, first you're coming in, and so hopefully you're in an established department, but sometimes even when you have an established department, people don't know when they need you. So part of it is, really getting to understand when people, what the processes are in drawing people to come to you with their questions. And to add on to what David said, the way you get people to come to you with their questions is you're a problem solver. You are there, so you want to just draw them in, bring you the things, and then you start filtering what actually needs to come to me. Because if you don't know what they're doing, it's hard to make sure that the whole company is compliant with what it needs to do. If you're in a larger company, that's probably not as much of an issue. So you're looking for people who you can take and look at what the business wants to accomplish, take the empathy, put yourself in their shoes, right? Because see what they were trying to accomplish. And then look at, here's what we can do. And when you tell them what they can't do, try to tell them what they could do instead. If you change this, you can do, you can move forward, right? You're looking for people who can think in that way. I don't know if that's any different, really. I didn't spend enough time being in law firms to know if that's a whole lot different from being in a law firm. But when I do work with external counsel, I am looking for people who I want to work with firms like in different areas. Obviously in technology, we have a lot of non-practicing entity litigation, right? So establishing a relationship with a firm where the attorneys know our technology. We have a lot of different products, so it can span, but if they know our products, they know kind of how we have a strategy of dealing with this, kind of partner with us in our overall strategy. I can go back to them, right? So that's what we're kind of looking for.
Yeah. I'm just going to jump in with, I have a slightly different perspective. I actually spent most of my career as an outside lawyer before I went in-house. I was well into my 40s. And the most difficult part for me in that transition was what we've been talking about, this difference in the role between an outside lawyer and an in-house lawyer. And it took me about 18 months to sort of figure it out. Maybe I'm a slow learner. But it understanding the role of an in-house lawyer, and your role is not just to identify the issue, it's really to find a solution, and find a solution that's coupled with the company's business strategy. And so when I look for an outside lawyer, that's the type of lawyer that I look for, is somebody who asks me questions about what business goals we're trying to achieve, not just focusing on the discrete legal issue. Irene, can you tell us about your experience in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two things that come to mind when I look for an external counsel, and even when I'm bringing an external counsel in-house and they're first-time in-house lawyers, I'm really looking for someone to be practical and succinct. Those are the two key things that I want from my external counsel as well as my in-house counsel. So I actually onboarded a new person to my team this morning, and he's coming from a law firm, privacy lawyer who is a privacy partner. So this goes to the first question. This is probably a person that has more privacy expertise than I do, but at the same time, I can help offer that business insight into the business that he doesn't have yet, but then he can run. And what I advise him is make sure that in your partner hat, when you're at a law firm, you want to make sure you're getting everything right. Like you are trying to create all of the scenarios so that you can create a comprehensive advice at times if the client wants that. But for us at a startup, we need speed, execution, practical, and succinct advice. So in order for you to take all of that together, I want you to take the partner hat off. I want you to partner with the business, understand and build that empathy, figure out what the problem is, find the solution as quickly as possible, sum up that solution in bullet points so that you're giving the business 1 to 2 options for them to decide, and then let them decide. But the reality is you can't come in with a memo. You can't come in with many bullet points. You can't come in with too many options. So make sure you come in with business practical, succinct advice. And if external counsel can help offer that, even better. And those are the counsels that we will be calling, not the ones that are giving us the memos or all the caveats that we don't necessarily need. So I typically look for that practical, flexible, succinct advice from external counsels as well as in-house counsels.
Great, great, great advice. So we have another question from the audience. And any one of you can answer this. So the question is, how important is the role of the general counsel in retaining overseas law firms, and how do you do it? Does anybody want to start with that? I'll start with it. So at least at the companies that I've been part of, the general counsel has very often a very direct role in retaining. Usually it's on a recommendation from somebody. We've got operations over in Europe and Asia, and one of my lawyers over there will say, look, we really need some advice on this. And so we have a set of guidelines that law firms have to adhere to. We spend some time looking for the right expertise. But if it's a major firm that we're going to be taking a lot of advice from or engaged in some type of litigation, I would definitely get involved. And what do we look for? I mean, we just talked a little bit as a group on some of the things that we look for. But cost is also very important, and firms that are open to alternative fee arrangements, which is something that I'm quite interested in, are other things that we look for. So David or Rashmi or Irene, anything you'd like to add on that?
In various capacities, so some of my businesses have been highly international, and there's one thing we've often done is have a US-based law firm that has connections and offices all around the world. Oftentimes these are more high-priced law firms, and they always have connections. And oftentimes, if you're launching products and doing work that's going to be multinational, having it all be managed through one US-based law firm and having them go find the international counsel and have them manage the counsel, especially with language differences, different currencies for payment, having it all routed through one US-based counsel makes it much more manageable.
Good point. Okay, so folks in the audience, we need a few more questions, but I've got some other ones that I'll go to now, but please either raise your hand or use the Q&A function. So another area that's a little different in an in-house environment than in a law firm is that as the general counsel to the CLO, you are a key leader in the company. Usually you're part of the executive team, and you've got a seat at the table in decision making for the company. The question is, what are some of the key leadership skills you think are needed for a general counsel or a senior in-house legal role? And how did you go about developing those? Irene, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, what people don't really realize about the general counsel role is that it's truly a business partner role. So you're sitting at the table with all the business partners. The value that you're bringing is that you do have legal expertise, but you want to appear as a business partner. So you, again, have to sort of shift your communication style so that it's practical and succinct, so that it's digestible to the business, so that you're saying the yeses versus the nos. And that skill for me was something that I had to develop. And one of the things I did early on with my career as a first-time GC in my last role was I actually had an executive coach. So I had a coach that helped me refine how I communicate as well, so that to ensure, from just there was just a lot of learnings. Like, even though as the number 2 lawyer, I felt that I could do the GC job, substantively I could, but the GC role is very soft skills driven, because you have to be a partner to everyone. And in order to develop those skills, the spheres of influence, and to build that sphere of influence, I actually sought external help. And I know other GCs have done that as well too. And that's helped me bridge some of those soft skills gap that I may have had in my first GC job. I don't have a coach any longer, but I found that to be incredibly beneficial, and I would encourage it for others too.
David, did you have thoughts there?
Yeah, I think especially when you leave a law firm, I think the skill set is entirely different from what you learn at a law firm. Things are, if they're still done this way, very understandable in terms of lockstep promotions at law firms and how it works to go from junior associate to mid-level associate to senior associate to partner. Once you're inside a company, you're working within the system of organizations and promotions they're not lockstep at all. They depend on skill sets, what you bring to the table, and how much you're advancing the interests of the company. And then what gets you promoted is partly legal skill, very much how well you work with others. And are you, from a personality perspective, somebody who's showing up at meetings in a very positive way, looking to solve problems instead of being a person who's known to show up at meetings and not really be there to solve problems? And can you show that you can build teams as a manager and then be an effective people manager? And especially as you get to that spot of managing the whole legal team, so much of what you do is you're a people manager, you're building an organization, you're working on budgets, getting budget approvals, you're working with your managers, who may be the CEO or president, trying to get the resources you need to hire out a team. You're working on things like compensation and org charts, all of which you don't really learn until you get into a company or you very proactively go out to seek that kind of learning.
Great. Rashmi, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I would say to echo a little bit of that. Yeah, you're building a team, so building the culture you want in your team, motivating people, keeping them aligned with what our overall corporate objectives are. Those are things you spend your time on, and you've got a budget and you've got time. Same thing, limited both. So you want to be able to prioritize, get comfortable with risk assessments of, there will be the bright lines of these are legal requirements, but a lot of what we do in negotiating contracts is, shifting risk from one party to another. How much time do we spend negotiating our lower dollar value contracts? Those types of things, the practical things, so that you can, focus and stay within your budget and time and get done what you need to get done, I would say are some of the leadership skills, but definitely motivating a team and getting, working across other departments, building those relationships is very important. And the more the better you do at that, then your legal team's advice flows better across the company as well.
Yeah, great point. So a couple of other questions from the audience. So the next question is, what issues have led you to part ways with outside counsel? And who'd like to go first? I've got some examples, but would anybody else like to go first on this one? I'll give mine quickly. Very often they have to do with litigation, especially litigation that might be borderline life-threatening for the company. And if there's a stumble where there's a lot of visibility, those are the situations where I've parted ways, or there's a divergence of interests, so generally speaking, most in-house lawyers and certainly most general counsels, they just want to get rid of litigation. And it used to bug me because I was a trial lawyer and I love doing that stuff. But as an in-house lawyer, litigation is kind of wasted money from my perspective. And so I want somebody who's going to figure out a way to get rid of a lawsuit as quickly as possible. And when I sense that the outside firm's interests are not lining up with those interests, we'll very often part ways. Anyone else have some examples?
I would say this, like, especially when dealing with the sort of top tier law firms that are charging high rates. And I've given work to them for a certain reason. I can't see a situation where I wouldn't be dealing with larger law firms because there are transactions in certain areas where we need that. But that's like the highest dollar value of my budget, per hour, minute, whatever. And so when I do that, it's like, I don't want to have to review your work. So I recently had a conversation with a firm where there was a couple of errors and stuff that was going to be in front of the board. And it's like, to have to review that work. I understand there are typos every once in a while, but it's just, I'm expecting to offload, not have to go back and look at what you did, find out that I now need to send an update to the board. So that's the type of stuff. And it probably seems obvious to you, but the fact that it occurs may be surprising to you.
Yeah, great point.
I've had the same issue, Rashmi. So quality, I think, is very important. And I've had the same issue where errors were caught. And I don't want them caught by the board. I don't want them caught by my CEO. And so, and if I'm paying for quality and I'm paying the rates that I am, like, I need you to double check the work. And so I've had to separate from law firms from quality issues. And like Rashmi was saying, errors happen and we understand, but I think it's the way you respond to that error that's important. To say, hey, like, we apologize for that error. Sometimes I don't hear an apology, even if there's a distinct quality issue. So to say, like, we apologize, but not only apologize, but to say, secondly, here are all the things that we're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I think that's the really key important part of reestablishing that trust and the rapport that was lost from the errors. And if repeat errors happen, obviously that is one of the reasons for termination. But I really do think part of it is the soft skill of even law firms to recognize not only do they made the error, but to say, here's all the things that we will do to make this right. Like, we apologize. And I think that goes far a long way than the error. And that'll really reestablish that trust far more quickly by recognizing it and setting up processes to ensure it doesn't happen again.
Great point. So another interesting question from the audience: to what extent do you use your position to promote diversity within your company and also within the law firms that you hire? Anyone? Rashmi, I think you and I have had a conversation about that previously. Would you like to take that one?
Yeah, we actually this year at our company have HR is leading a lot of our diversity and inclusion initiatives. But one of the things I'm looking at in my group is looking at our own, like, who we engage to do things, and looking to see, do they have the same emphasis on diversity and inclusion? Or it doesn't have to be the same, but are they thinking about it? Are they thinking about how they create a work environment where they're mentoring, creating promotion opportunities for people of all backgrounds, and because that's what we want. We strive to do internally. So we like to be working with people who do the same thing. And I guess I was saying a little bit to Brad the other day that I don't really see diversity in the partnership levels. And to be fair, there's probably is not as much diversity in the senior management of corporations either. But companies are dealing with that because the investors care. If you look at the guidelines that are coming out, we're a private company, but I'm watching what I might need to do if we were to become a public company. And as part of environmental, social governance, board diversity is a factor, but also just diversity across the company and various standards that are now optional right now for disclosure in those areas of sustainability and community are out there. And so, that is a way where I can help move that forward internally. I'm working on that actually right now by saying, look, if we're going to be a public company to attract investment, these are going to be important things, and that can help us push that initiative internally as well. Not that we don't want it anyway, but there's a lot of things going on in a company, and to make it more of a priority to get done sooner rather than later. And so when I've talked to, and I've had, lunches or whatever with law firm partners, occasionally I'll say, they'll tell me that what their clients want is important to them. So for those of you who are out there, I'm one client who would like to see you working on that. It doesn't mean you just give me this panel of people and they look diverse, but what are you really doing, to try to, bridge that gap when you have all these diverse candidates coming out of law school, and then, what happens as they move up through your firm? Are you really investing the same time and effort in all of them? I don't mean to be on a soapbox about it, but
No, that's good. That's good. So we now have a number of questions. So just in the interest of time, I want to go through them. But David or Irene, anything you wanted to quickly add on the diversity point?
I would say it is it's a really important point when we're seeking outside counsel. I'd say it's too infrequent, and it's really refreshing when we go to work with outside counsel and we do see more diversity.
And I would encourage, a lot of companies are doing this already, but one of the things I did was I started tracking like who are the lead women and diverse partners that we're using. And so for Checker, for example, we had about 75 to 80% were either relationships led by a female or diverse partner. And so it's really important to really know who you're calling, because that is the origination credit. And so we try to be conscious of who we're calling and continuing to build those relationships, because we understand from in-house perspective that our purse strings will help the diversity at law firms.
Great. So the next question. So all of the panelists have been part of several interesting companies, some as a first lawyer. How did they find these opportunities? And relatedly, how did you decide it was time to leave, and that, whatever you left for was the right opportunity? So who'd like to start with that one?
Well, I've done a lot of moving and a lot of leaving and a lot of joining, so I can probably speak to experience on that one.
Yeah, great.
So I think what has always been a source of my next move has been people I've worked with. And I think this is probably the most important point I can make is treat people well, do good service for them, and they are the source of your next opportunity. In my case, that has been 100% of the source of my next opportunity. Now, how did that work? For instance, I went to work at Yahoo and did work for a bunch of clients there. Some of those clients went to new startups. One of those startups was YouTube. And one of the early people who went to YouTube told me about this funny little video site he went to join, which I thought, oh, come on, nothing's going to become of that. And then he needed a lawyer. And so I'd done a lot of work with him at Yahoo, and I went to work at YouTube. There's a lot of stories just like that where you connect the dots backwards, but it was not very purposeful. It's just that you made those relationships and you did good work for people. For me, moving has been probably a bunch of personal stuff plus what excites me and what problems do I want to solve. For me personally, working at companies, I like to go and solve problems. And when the problems left to be solved are not that interesting, I don't have a whole lot of interest in staying around and what they call resting investing. You work at companies, you get stock options, and oftentimes, to be honest, there's not a whole lot you might be contributing at that company. In my view, if I'm not contributing a whole lot, it's not very interesting, and I look for the next big challenge. But there are plenty of people who work at really great companies for a long time, and they just love the culture. They love the constant contribution. And there are people who still do stay for 20 years at companies. It's all very personal.
Great. So Irene or Rashmi, same question. How did you find your first couple of opportunities, and when did you decide it was the right time to go and move on to the next one?
In terms of moving, for me, I always tell even my direct reports, find an opportunity to run to, not run from. I think that's really important, that sometimes work situations are hard and you may just want to run away, but you want to find that right opportunity that will build your career. So find the role that is a run to opportunity. And so that's what I've been trying to do in my career, is that wherever I'm moving, it is an opportunity that I'm running to versus running away. And I think Hopin was one place for me that looked like a really interesting opportunity, given its growth potential and its international spectrum. But for opportunities in general, the Hopin opportunity came in through a board member. But what I do recall was that when I was the number 2 attorney and I was trying to find a number 1 role, it was hard. It was not easy. And what I learned after becoming a general counsel is that the role is very abundant, but it's often only circulated among the GCs. And so there's this close niche of group of GCs that all know about the roles and they'll share it with each other, but you can never learn about it as a number 2. Like, it never falls down on your lap. And so you're constantly trying to figure out, like, how the hell do I become a GC? And so it took a lot of grit on my part when I was trying to figure out how to even become a GC. And I have a list, like, of the number of people that I talked to. I actually created a list because I was like, this is like perseverance at its best, where I talked to, I think, close to like 20 different people and many different companies, and just to figure out like how this works. And what I've learned is really ultimately it's networks. And it's word of mouth. It's getting it out there to as many people as possible, including GCs, that you are interested in a number 1 role, so that for all the GCs that already know about these roles, they can potentially pass them down to you, and that they will think about you. And so I think that's one of the things that you have to make sure that you do. It's not just all about doing your job best at your organization, but really networking and letting people know that you are interested in a GC role, and please keep me in mind. And I think that will help to land that GC role that somehow circulates abundantly among the GC circle, but not elsewhere.
Great. Rashmi, anything to add on that one?
Networking, yeah, I say getting to know people, and CFOs, because often a company will need, if you want to be the first attorney, they'll need a CFO, and then the CFO will have to be dealing with legal, and at some point they'll say, no more, I need to get somebody in here. So those are good people to try to meet, see as many CFOs as kind of the startup companies that you can.
Okay, we've only got a few minutes left here, and I've got a wealth of questions now. So I'll just go with the next one. So 2-part question. Are you evaluated on your ability to reduce external legal costs? I think I can answer that on everybody's behalf. The answer is yes. And if so, how do you balance the risk trade-off in making those decisions? So it's an excellent question. Who wants to go first? I'll kick it off. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Rashmi.
I was going to say, I generally look for things that are more routine and that we're going to do over and over again. And those are the things we're going to keep in-house and I'm a staff for, and then even look at, can we get automation out there to handle some of this? Can we train our business people to handle those? Then there's going to be just some things that, in our budget, there's certain areas that will be exceptional spend, so to speak. I have a little more flexibility there. I don't know if other companies run that way. I've had that a few times. Oftentimes M&A will be in that bucket. And then the rest of it, you're really just, looking at where do I need that expertise? If it's coming up over and over again, just bring that work in-house to help balance that and keep enough in external spend for those areas that are not routine. That's one way to approach it.
Yeah, that's a similar approach to what I use. David or Irene, any other thoughts that you have on balancing that? Driving, reducing costs while making sure that nobody goes to jail?
Yeah, I think you just need to align again on budget with management and make it very clear to them about the choices they're making. I make sure that the person I report to, in this instance is the president, really knows how my budget is allocated and why it's allocated that way and why we're making the trade-offs we're making and what those trade-offs mean. So if we decide, hey, it's much more important for us to invest in IP than it is for us to invest in a lot of, let's say, very expensive legal memos about regulatory, and then we're going to take on a lot of this regulatory analysis ourselves, I want them to understand the trade-offs inherent in that, or vice versa, so that it's a shared decision.
Good. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. And unfortunately, we've got about 5 excellent questions. So let's see. This last one. So can you briefly describe the relationship that you all have with your boards? People are curious about the relationship with the lead lawyer and the boards of directors.
We're owned by private equity right now, and so really have kind of a single shareholder, and the board's really reflective of the single shareholder. And I deal a lot with the chairman of the board, which and chair of the audit committee, just kind of on things like that. That's my main points of contact to the board. I try to have just understand what they want to know about. Generally, often it's litigation, and then kind of some, on the audit committee side, we have a cybersecurity committee, kind of understand what areas they're interested in and be conversant and able to answer questions in those areas. But it's a little bit, I guess, maybe easier when you have just one investor, and the board is sort of reflective of the one investor.
Okay. Yeah, I have a similar situation. David or Irene, anything you'd like to add there quickly?
I try to establish a personal connection with the board wherever possible, but with the CEO's permission. So it's important that you keep your CEO in the loop of any board discussions that you're having. And then once your CEO's bought in that your relationship with the board is valuable, then they will let you freely meet them. And so I had a more regular meetings with the board members outside of the boardroom because I was able to establish that rapport with my CEO and the board members. So I think that's important as a general counsel.
That's a great point. Very good. Always make sure you ask permission first with the CEO. That's a very valuable relationship for him. Okay, well, I think oh, sorry.
I said,
yeah, I think we've run out of time. I want to thank everybody. You were great panelists, and I'm going to turn it back to Karen.
All right. Yeah, let me echo Brad's thanks. And I'd like to thank Brad and Rashmi and Irene and David for your time and your insights and your stories. I'm going to summarize the GCs that we have on here as empathetic, problem-solving people. So that's what I heard from you all today, that those were the most important skills. I also want to thank Doreen and Aaron, our Berkeley Law staff, who planned all of this and did all of the tech support. And thank you to everybody who came and joined us today and for your great questions. And I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of them, but thank you so much for this really active discussion. And we look forward to seeing you at other Berkeley Law events, and hopefully those can be in person sooner rather than later. So thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah.